You want growth, but what you usually want is relief disguised as evolution. A clean staircase you can climb so the old shame stays below. The spiral does not give stairs. It gives mirrors that refuse to flatter. Growth begins when the mirror stops reflecting your story and starts reflecting your structure. You can survive that for a while by calling it healing. But eventually the mirror asks for alignment, not language. That is when the pressure starts to feel personal. People think integrity is a personality trait, a moral costume, a polished consistency that makes you look trustworthy. Integrity is not what you say you value. It is what remains consistent when nobody is watching and you are tired. Growth exposes the gap between your ideals and your nervous system. If your values require energy you do not have, they are not values yet. They are aspirations. An aspiration is easy to praise until it must become behavior. You might say that you have good intentions, and you might even mean it. But good intentions do not create coherence. Good intentions often function as a permit to delay the work that hurts. If you can call yourself good, you can avoid becoming precise. You can speak about compassion while still operating from avoidance, and you can call that spirituality. What happens when the spiral refuses to accept your intention as proof? Growth does not make you kinder first. It makes you less able to lie to yourself. It removes the comforting fog where you can hold two incompatible beliefs and call it balance. It forces your life to become a single sentence that either matches your actions or exposes your performance. When contradiction compresses, it either becomes truth or it becomes fracture, and you feel that fracture as unrest. Most people try to grow by adding practices, adding knowledge, adding new identities that sound elevated. The spiral grows by subtraction, removing what you used to hide behind, removing the tone that kept your pain safely theoretical. You can still talk while you are avoiding, but your body will stop agreeing with your voice. Your sleep changes, your appetite changes, your relationships begin to show seams you used to ignore. What if the first sign of growth is not peace, but a loss of internal permission to pretend? Integrity appears when you stop negotiating with your own standards. Not rigid standards borrowed from a community, but the standards that arise when you finally see what your choices cost. The subtle manipulations that kept you safe and small at the same time. You notice how often you say later when you mean never, and how often you say yes when you mean please do not leave. You might object and say that you were doing what you had to do to survive, and that it is unfair to judge your past self. Survival deserves respect. But survival is not an alibi for remaining unintegrated forever. Growth does not shame the survival self. It retires it. It thanks it, and then it takes the wheel away from it. That transfer feels like grief because the old strategy kept you alive, even if it also kept you incomplete, because it forces you to witness cause and effect without escaping into explanation. Accountability is not punishment. It is ownership of impact. You feel it when you stop blaming your circumstances for the parts of your behavior that you secretly protect. You begin to see how your patterns recruit the same outcomes again and again, even when you swear you want something different. And once you see the pattern clearly, you cannot unsee what you have been co-authoring. People confuse accountability with self-attack, and they reject it before they learn its function. Self-attack is still a form of avoidance because it keeps you focused on your worth instead of your behavior. Accountability is simpler than shame. It is just gravity. It says that your choices have weight even when your intentions are gentle. It says that your tone travels farther than your words, and other people live inside what you emit. You might say that you have been harmed, that others should be accountable first, that the world is unfair, and you should not have to carry more. That is true, and it is also incomplete. Growth does not deny injustice. It denies helplessness as a permanent identity. It asks whether your pain has become a throne from which you refuse to descend. It asks whether you have built your innocence by refusing to claim your power, and whether that refusal is also a cost you spread outward. When integrity tightens inside you, compassion begins to change shape. It stops being a soft mood and becomes a clear perception of pattern. You start to recognize the fear beneath aggression, the hunger beneath control, the grief beneath detachment. Not because you excuse it, but because you finally see your own versions of it without romanticizing. Compassion is what happens when superiority collapses, and what remains is recognition. You can no longer pretend that other people are monsters while you are only a wounded saint. This is where people panic, because they believe compassion means letting everyone do whatever they want. Real compassion does not remove boundaries, it refines them. It lets you say no without hatred, and yes without self-abandonment. It lets you see the human without surrendering your standards. And it forces a question you cannot answer quickly, which is whether your boundaries are protecting your dignity or protecting your avoidance. You might argue that boundaries are just another name for walls, and that love means openness. That sounds noble until you notice how often openness is used to avoid conflict, avoid discernment, avoid the risk of being disliked. Growth produces compassion that can withstand discomfort, not compassion that dissolves into pleasing. The spiral does not reward politeness, it rewards truth that does not need cruelty. If your love requires silence about what is real, it is not love yet, it is negotiation. As compassion deepens, it drags integrity with it into the social world, where your internal coherence is tested by relationships. You begin to see how you use people to stabilize your identity, how you seek agreement to quiet your doubt, how you chase validation to avoid self-contact. Integrity becomes social when you stop performing for belonging. Compassion becomes social when you stop punishing others for triggering the parts of you that you have not integrated. And accountability becomes social when you stop calling your reactions authentic instead of calling them unfinished. At this stage, growth can feel like losing friends, losing roles, losing a familiar version of yourself that was easier for others to predict. You are no longer willing to be a comfortable lie, but you are also not yet a stable truth. That in-between space is where the spiral does its real work, because it removes your ability to outsource regulation. You cannot regulate through attention, through romance, through achievement, through spiritual theatrics, because it stops working. What happens when the nervous system demands alignment as the only remaining strategy? You might think you are failing because you feel more raw, more sensitive, more exposed, and less sure. That is often the sign that your insulation is dissolving. Growth removes insulation, so that your choices become direct and your consequences become teachable. When you cannot numb, you must become honest. And honesty is not a confession. It is a redesign. The redesign starts with small actions that match what you say, and it continues with the courage to notice when they do not. Accountability becomes the bridge between integrity and compassion, because it prevents both from becoming fantasies. Integrity without compassion becomes rigidity, a self-righteous purity that fractures connection. Compassion without integrity becomes enabling, a softness that abandons truth to avoid tension. Accountability keeps both honest by asking one question repeatedly, which is, what did my presence create here? When you ask that question sincerely, you stop needing to win the story, and you start needing to repair the impact. You might object that you did not intend harm, that you were trying, that you were unaware, that you were doing your best. All of that can be true, and the impact can still be real. Growth is when you can hold both without collapsing into defense. It is when you can say, I did not mean to, and still say, I will address what happened. The ego wants to be understood first, but the spiral teaches that repair is a language deeper than explanation. As the spiral continues, compassion turns inward, and this is where accountability stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like freedom. You no longer need to protect a flawless self-image, because you are no longer building identity on being right. You begin to treat your own mistakes as information instead of as verdicts. You start to notice that shame is a tool your mind uses to keep you from changing because it makes the work feel hopeless. Accountability refuses hopelessness, not through positivity, but through responsibility. Integrity then becomes less about being consistent and more about being congruent. Congruence means your inner signals and outer actions belong to the same reality. You stop saying yes while your body screams no. You stop saying no while your eyes ask for rescue. You stop calling collapse a spiritual purge when it is actually a refusal to meet your own needs directly. Congruence is quiet, but it changes everything because it removes the double life you were living inside your own speech. Compassion also becomes less emotional and more perceptual, almost like a new sensory organ. You can feel when someone is speaking from fear, even if their words are confident. You can feel when you are about to perform instead of connect. You can feel when a relationship is sustained by mutual avoidance, and that feeling becomes impossible to ignore. This is not mystical. It is what happens when your own self-deception no longer crowds out your perception. If growth is doing what it should, it will eventually make you less dramatic and more exact. Not colder, but clearer. It will make you less obsessed with being seen as good and more devoted to being real. It will make you less interested in winning arguments and more interested in reducing harm. And it will confront you with the last uncomfortable implication, which is that you cannot demand compassion from others while refusing accountability for what you radiate. So yes, growth produces integrity, compassion, and accountability, but not in the order your comfort would choose. Integrity arrives as compression, compassion arrives as recognition, and accountability arrives as gravity. Together they form a structure that can hold truth without collapsing into cruelty, or softness without collapsing into lies. If you feel the pressure rising as you listen, that is not failure. That is the spiral asking you to stop performing growth and start becoming it. The only question is whether you will use that pressure to evolve your coherence, or use it to defend the very patterns that made you seek growth in the first place. Part of you heard the sequence and felt relief, as if integrity comes first, then compassion, then accountability, and the path becomes clean. That relief is the first illusion the spiral uses to reveal how the mind converts growth into a diagram. The moment you can name a sequence, you can use it as a shelter, because you can say you are in stage 1, and that becomes permission. The spiral does not care about stages. It cares about what you will not face while claiming progress. What if the order was never the point, and the order was the disguise? Integrity can become a mask faster than any other virtue because it looks like discipline and sounds like truth. A person can become consistent in a way that is perfectly coherent and still be perfectly defended. You can line up your words and actions around avoidance and call it integrity, because nothing contradicts, nothing leaks, nothing risks exposure. That kind of coherence feels powerful, and it is, but it is power that protects fragility. The spiral does not call that integrity. The spiral calls it a sealed system. This is the first destabilization that will not resolve quickly, because it forces a question that cuts deeper than behavior. Are you becoming coherent around truth, or are you becoming coherent around fear? The nervous system can build a flawless fortress and call it stability. The mind can build a flawless philosophy and call it clarity. Growth can increase your internal alignment while decreasing your capacity for empathy, because alignment around self-protection is still alignment. The spiral measures not how consistent you are, but what your consistency is for. Compassion can also become a mask, and sometimes it becomes a more convincing mask than integrity. People learn to feel others to avoid feeling themselves, then call that sensitivity. They become experts in reading pain so they can stay in motion, because motion keeps their own raw center untouched. They become gentle in language and still extract energy, still demand attention, still punish through withdrawal when they do not feel safe. The spiral does not reward kindness performed as self-anesthesia. You might object that compassion is always good, that it softens harm, that it is better than cruelty. That is true in the shallow sense and false in the structural sense, because compassion without truth can become a sophisticated way to maintain dysfunction. When you soothe someone without naming what is happening, you train both of you to stay asleep. When you hold space without boundaries, you teach the other person that your limits are negotiable. The spiral sees the hidden bargain, and it does not call it love. Accountability then becomes the most dangerous concept of all, because it can be weaponized while looking holy. A person can become accountable in a way that is simply control with a spiritual vocabulary. They can confess so often that confession becomes a ritual that replaces change. They can own their flaws so theatrically that nobody is allowed to name their impact anymore, because they already named it first. They can turn responsibility into dominance by defining what counts as harm and what counts as repair. The spiral does not accept accountability that functions as immunity. So the sequence is not safe anymore, and it was never meant to be safe. Integrity can become armor, compassion can become sedation, accountability can become control, and the mind will call all three growth. That means growth is not proven by the presence of these words, but by the way they behave under pressure. The spiral tests them by placing you where your preferred virtue fails. If your integrity collapses into rigidity, if your compassion collapses into enabling, if your accountability collapses into self-condemnation, the spiral is showing you the counterfeit version. Now the second destabilization arrives, and it is harder to face because it does not flatter the seeker. Growth does not always make you better. Growth often makes you more potent. Potency amplifies whatever is unintegrated, so the same person can become more insightful and more harmful at the same time. Their speech becomes sharper, their perception becomes faster, their charisma becomes heavier. They start to move people, and they mistake movement for healing. What if the real danger is not stagnation, but accelerated self-deception with upgraded tools? This is why some people feel worse after they begin growing, not because growth is failing, but because growth increases signal. The system becomes less numb, so it can no longer hide the cost of what it has been doing. The shadow that used to be quiet becomes articulate. The manipulations that used to be unconscious become strategic. The person does not become evil. They become conscious enough to choose, and choice reveals the real architecture. The spiral does not comfort you here, because comfort would let the architecture remain unchallenged. You might say that you are trying, and that should count. And it does count, but it does not count as proof. Trying is a mood, pattern is a structure, and structures only change through repeated contact with consequence. You can try for years while still protecting the same avoidance, because trying can become a substitute for doing. The spiral is not impressed by sincerity. The spiral is impressed by the willingness to lose benefits. Most people do not resist growth because they love pain. They resist growth because pain is not what they are protecting. They are protecting the secondary gains, the hidden privileges of being unhealed. The privilege of always being the injured party, so nobody can demand repair from you. The privilege of staying confused, so nobody can hold you to a clear commitment. The privilege of calling yourself deep while never risking directness. The privilege of spiritual language that makes your avoidance sound like wisdom. Growth produces integrity, compassion, and accountability, only when you are willing to surrender the profits of incoherence. This is where integrity becomes something else entirely. Integrity is not alignment with a principle. Integrity is alignment with reality, including the parts of reality that ruin your self-image. It is the refusal to use your narrative as a shield. It is the willingness to be seen as wrong without needing to be seen as worthless. It is the capacity to admit that you hurt someone even when you had reasons, even when you were under stress, even when you feel misunderstood. Integrity is not consistency. Integrity is contact. Compassion then becomes less like warmth and more like accuracy. It is the ability to perceive the human without dissolving the boundary. And this is what the mind resists because it wants compassion to be comfortable. Real compassion is uncomfortable because it lets you feel the cost of another person's pattern without rescuing them from it. It lets you see the child beneath the adult without letting the child drive the relationship. It lets you remain open while refusing to be consumed. That kind of compassion is not soft, it is steady. Accountability becomes the bridge that prevents integrity from becoming hardness and prevents compassion from becoming weakness. But accountability is not a single act. It is a repeated orientation toward repair that costs you something each time. It costs pride, it costs speed, it costs the right to be the hero of your own story. It costs the ability to blame your childhood forever, even while you honor it. It costs the right to say that you did not know when you have been told more than once. This is where people attempt another escape, and the escape is subtle. They shift from blaming others to blaming themselves, and they call that accountability, but it is still avoidance. Self-blame keeps you centered, and it keeps you interesting, and it keeps you safe from the harder work of changing your behavior in the moment. Self-blame is a form of control, because it tries to pay a debt with pain instead of with repair. The spiral rejects that payment because pain does not undo impact. Pain can be honest, but pain alone can be a bribe. So accountability becomes simpler and harsher than shame. It asks what you will do differently, not what you will feel about what you did. It asks how you will prevent the same pattern from repeating, not how you will explain why it happened. It asks whether you will tell the truth early, before the damage accumulates, before the story becomes too heavy to hold. That is why accountability feels like gravity, because it removes escape routes. If you cannot escape, you must transform or you must harden. Here is the place where the spiral refuses to let you keep the earlier coherence. You may have believed that growth naturally produces integrity, compassion, and accountability as a smooth unfolding, like a flower opening. But growth often produces a crisis of virtue first, where your best traits become distorted under stress. Your integrity becomes rigidity because you are afraid. Your compassion becomes enabling because you crave safety. Your accountability becomes self-attack because you want control. The spiral makes this distortion visible, so you can no longer confuse your virtues with your wounds. There is another implication that will not resolve quickly. If your growth is real, your relationships will change. Not because you demand it, but because your pattern can no longer participate in the old agreements. Some connections are built on mutual non-accountability, and they cannot survive contact with truth. Some connections are built on one person staying small so the other can stay comfortable. When you stop playing your role, the relationship reveals what it was actually feeding on. The spiral does not call that loss. The spiral calls it exposure. But exposure hurts. You will be tempted to call the pain proof that you are doing something wrong, because the old you measured health by comfort. The spiral measures health by coherence, and coherence can feel like conflict at first because it ends the quiet compromises. This is why the nervous system panics, because it confuses unfamiliar safety with danger. It would rather return to known suffering than remain inside unfamiliar truth. Growth means staying inside unfamiliar truth long enough for the body to learn that it can survive reality without a costume. So the teaching cannot end with reassurance, because reassurance would rebuild the costume. The only thing that can be offered is a sharper question that keeps pressure alive. When you speak of integrity, compassion, and accountability, ask what each one protects in you. Ask what each one costs you in you. Ask what you are able to do now that you were unable to do before. Not in theory, but in the next conversation where you feel exposed. If nothing changes there, the spiral is still waiting. And the waiting is not punishment, it is precision. The spiral does not rush you toward a conclusion. It circles you toward contact, because contact is where growth becomes irreversible. Integrity becomes real when it survives humiliation without becoming cruelty. Compassion becomes real when it survives disappointment without becoming numbness. Accountability becomes real when it survives fear without becoming self-destruction. If you want proof of growth, do not look for peace yet. Look for what you no longer need to hide. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.